So I made a video before this one about the three different branches of government and what each power that each branch had and how they were supposed to work together. And then I got a phone call, and then I wasn't sure if the video was going to go through. So I said, I'm going to put this in the second video, and I would put militia somewhere in the title. So this is that video if you've come from the other video about the three branches of government in the U.S. Constitution. So, welcome to everybody who made it this far. This is Brighten-Up-Sunshine, where every day is a new beginning. Today, we're going to take a trip back to the fiery birth of a nation. Imagine this, the year 1775. A group of farmers, blacksmithers, and shopkeepers, ordinary people like you and me, stand on a battlefield in Lexington, facing down the most powerful army in the whole world. And what did they have? Well, they did not have much, but they had a cause, and they had their arms. They were armed. The Second Amendment was not about hunting. It was about survival. It was about freedom and standing guard against tyranny. Fast forward to 1787. The founders are writing the Constitution. The memory of the British redcoats marching into homes is fresh in their mind. They remember all about it. They knew a free people must never be helpless in the face of power. And so they wrote this: a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A well-regulated did not mean government controlled. It meant trained and disciplined. Militia meant you and me, the common citizens, ready for what? To defend liberty. And shall not be infringed. This was clear. No overreach from any of those three executive branches, no compromising. This was happened to be, and this is why they wrote it this way. Why did the founding fathers say a well-armed militia was everything? This was about not sport. This was about keeping the country sovereign. The founders saw disarmament as the first move of every tyrant in history. They feared standing armies that answered only to kings and not to the people. Here's a quote from the founding father, George Mason. To disarm the people is the most effectual way to enslave them. Here's another one from Thomas Jefferson. What country can preserve its liberties if their rulers are not warned from time to time that their people preserve the spirit of resistance? When did it all start to change? So what happened? How did we go from Lexington and Concord to legal battles in a courtroom? Remember, these rights were not to be infringed on. Let's take a visual timeline here, or well, I guess this is my visual, this art that I did of this bear. But just imagine, the year is 1871. The NRA, National Rifle Association, is founded not as a lobbying group, but as a marksmanship organization. 1934, the National Firearms Act. It was the first major federal gun law. Machine guns, sawed-offs, and silencers were now to be regulated. 1934. 1968, Gun Control Act. Following JFK and MLK's assassination, then they decided we need to have control of these guns. Remember, the Second Amendment shall not be infringed. The tide was slowly turning, and we're only into the year 1968. Take a look at 1994. Assault weapons ban. A line in the sand right there for so many. Then take a look, 2008, the District of Columbia versus Heller, Heller. It was a major legal pivoting affirming an individual's right to own guns. It was just a pivotal moment right there in law. The debate had shifted from the people's right to bear arms to how much control can the government, or should the government, actually have? And what right can they have? What does it mean for us today? Today, some believe the Second Amendment is simply outdated, written for musketeers. In a time of revolution, so they actually called them muskets. I think I'm getting musketeers because I think some Democrats were calling that for Elon or something. But anyway, others argue it's more relevant than ever to have the Second Amendment. It's our last safeguard against tyranny, chaos, and collapse. So whether you're pro or anti-gun, understanding the original intention of our founding fathers is a key to meaningful debate. The Second Amendment is not just about weapons. It's about responsibility, resistance, and readiness. It's about a people who refused to be ruled and chose to govern themselves. The Constitution does not just belong in textbooks. It actually belongs in the people's hearts and in our lives and our conversations. But it's been stripped away, and most of us don't even understand history. So let's keep this dialogue going, not with anger, but with understanding. If this steered you in any way, please feel free to comment, because I want to jump into a little bit of history taken off of the last video I made, which I suggest you go listen to. And it's about the three branches of government and the power each branch has and how they were not supposed to overstep the other. And it's so packed full of history. But I'm going to take up from that video, and I'm going to say that when the Supreme Court of the law of the land goes head to head with a strong president during a national crisis or a high stakes moment, it often loses the practical fight, even if it's right constitutionally. So let's unpack that. Why does it not end well for the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court has no army, you see. It has no budget, and it has no enforcement law. Remember, the enforcement law belongs with the president's branch of government. Now, the Supreme Court, it can make a ruling, but it has to rely on that executive branch, which is the president's branch, to enforce the ruling. So there you go. If the president says, no, I don't want that, there's not really much the court can physically do unless the president's executive branch wants to go against itself. We can see history did this so many different times, even modern times today with Biden and with Trump. Okay, like Andrew Jackson, he allegedly said, John Marshall, who was the Supreme Court person at the time, has made this decision that went against Andrew Jackson. But Andrew Jackson says, now let John Robertson go ahead, or John Marshall, let him go ahead and enforce it if that's his ruling. He just went on ignoring the court's decision on Native American rights. This was Andrew Jackson. Now, presidents in time of crisis hold the upper hand. In wartime, rebellion, pandemics, as we've seen, and economic depressions or terrorist threats, presidents actually often act quickly. And to do so, they have to sometimes overreach. But the public often supports them if they seem to be protecting the nation. Lincoln suspended habeas corpus, which is basically he defied the court during the Civil War. So you'll have to go look that up. But that was about Lincoln. I don't want to get into it in this video. It'll take longer. But did it break the rules? Yes. Many historical people say, yes, it did. But did it also save the Union? Without a doubt. That's what he believed, and history did lean his way. By doing that during the Civil War, he did save the Union. So the courts often get blamed later, even when the court makes a just decision. It can look like it's out of touch or weak if it's not backed by the people or the president. And usually the president is elected by the people. So if you're against the president, you're usually against more of the people. In Dred Scott versus Sanford, the court ruled that Black people could never be citizens, which was a horrific decision. But the court thought it would prevent the war. Instead, it actually became the spark that ignited it. Later, the court's credibility took a massive hit with this. Now, when the courts push too hard, it gets pushed back. Stay with me because we're going to tie this all back into the Second Amendment. Now, FDR's Supreme Court kept striking down things in his New Deal program. So what did he do? He threatened to pack the court by adding more justices. Even though Congress did not let him, the court magically just started approving his legislation soon after he was basically telling them, look, I'm going to do this anyway. I'll pack the court if I have to. So the court seemed to back down to keep its legitimacy, save face. So what's the reality? And again, this is going to tie back to the Second Amendment. So stick with me because this is history, and that's what history is. We have to understand it all ties together. The Supreme Court is very powerful on paper, but the president is powerful in practice. Why is that? Well, you might ask, especially when the public is behind him. That's why the real strength of our system is not just in one branch. It's in the balance, the push and pull, and the people staying awake. So the Supreme Court may have the final word on what's constitutional, but it is the president and the executive branch who decides whether the word turns into action. Remember, that's the enforcement branch. And when the people are not paying attention, power doesn't stay balanced. Sometimes it shifts. So this may be why, now we're tying back in the Second Amendment, this may be why it's wrote that there was to be a well-armed militia. Absolutely why. It's something the founders were deeply concerned about. These three executive branches was like, guys, get along, do your job, don't overstep. But if you do, we're going to have the people well-armed. So you're tapping into something here that the founders really did believe. How to stop tyranny, especially if it comes from within our own government. Let's break this down because it's more than just about owning guns. It's about balance of power, not just between the branches, but between the government and the people. Remember, it starts with we the people. So why was there supposed to be a well-armed militia? A founding ideal. Government is a servant, not a master. I'll repeat because it's worth repeating. Government was designed to serve the people, not to master the people. The founders had just fought a bloody war against a powerful empire, Britain. They knew firsthand what happens when a government goes too strong and the people are powerless. So they designed what we call the Constitution, with the checks and balances inside the government. Checks on government power from the people. The government was only to have the power from the people. In fact, if you look at our history, we were not even taxed until after the war. Our own government was not to tax us. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, Second Amendment. Why was it wrote like that? Because they knew if they didn't have a well-armed people and a well-educated people, then there would be tyranny. It was necessary, their words, not mine, to the security of a free state. A well-armed militia was not just about national defense. It was about protecting liberty from foreign invaders, tyrannical presidents, or federal overreach. Standing armies controlled only by the executive branch. See, they were also protecting themselves against the standing armies. They didn't want army men against them, the citizens. They were like, we will arm ourselves, thank you. We don't need our military to protect us, and we don't need someone else's military here. Because remember, our early founding fathers had just went through the British sending their military over and them having to feed them, clothe them, put them in homes, take care of them basically. And they were being ruled by the British military. It's such an interesting history. And they said, no, we'll protect ourselves. We don't want that. We'll protect ourselves. We want a government doing all the things like for us, but actually by us. Like we hold the power, we the people. Remember, early Americans did not trust any standing armies at all. They saw the militia, citizens trained and ready to fight if needed, as a necessary counterbalance to government overreach. So, what happens when a branch goes rogue? When presidents ignore a Supreme Court, when Supreme Courts don't follow Constitution, when Congress becomes corrupt, when courts favor the powerful, the original ideal was the last line of defense would be the people should not be helpless. A well-armed, well-trained citizen militia was not about rebellion for no reason. It was a last line of defense against the tyrannical government. So has it played out this way? Well, if you listen to the first part of this video, you'll see where the laws started changing. Not exactly. Today's National Guard has replaced the old militia system. The federal government holds most of the military power now, and the ideal of a militia is often misunderstood or politicized, and the citizens are actually mostly uneducated in what our founding fathers gave us. Now, is the Second Amendment there? You bet it is. It's still there on the book. Is it being activated? Yeah, no, not really. But the foundational ideal is still there. Power must always have a counterweight. That is why we have the Second Amendment. The Constitution did not just build a government, it built breaks, boundaries, and backup plans. And one of those backup plans, a people who could stand up and not just vote, not just protest, but actually defend liberty if ever truly threatened. So, absolutely, this is why it was wrote. So let's dig into some key moments when militia were actually used in American history. And yes, there is some history here. Real stories where everyday citizens, not professional soldiers, answered the call. Some of these times, the militia defended liberty. Other times, things got very complicated. But they all show how deep the militia is woven into American story and American history. Let's go all the way back to 1775 to 1783. This is where it all began. Militias were the backbone of the early fight against the British rule. The famous Minutemen, have you ever heard of that? Where militia was ready to fight at a moment's notice. We're talking about the battles of like Lexington and Concord. They started with local militias standing up to the British troops. They weren't polished, but they were passionate, and they helped birth our nation. Let's take a look at 1812 to 1850, or actually 1815. It was a 3-year span there. State militias helped defend the U.S. against British invasion. Again, where? New Orleans. Who? General Andrew Jackson. He led a mixed force of militia, pirates and free black soldiers, to a stunning victory. The militia showed up when the Federal Army was too small or overstretched. 1786 to 1787 was what was called Shays' Rebellion. This was actually a rebellion led by militia veterans. Many were unpaid Revolutionary War soldiers, and they rose up in Massachusetts against taxes. Taxes, foreclosures, and economic injustice. And remember, at the start of our history of our nation, we were not taxed. We weren't taxed till after the war. The state had to call in a private army to stop them, which shocked the nation. This was the talk all over in 1786, 1787. The state called that private army in and stopped them. The rebellion partly inspired the drafting of what we call the U.S. Constitution, showing the need for a stronger federal system with 3 different branches of government. Please watch the other video for that. But also raising questions about government's power and the right of the people to resist when they overstep their power. It was for the people, by the people. Remember, that's what it was originally for. So 1791 to 1794, the Whiskey Rebellion. Pennsylvania farmers rebelled against the federal tax on whiskey. Who was there? President George Washington himself. He led a 13,000-man militia to put it down. It was the first real test of actual federal authority under the Constitution. And it proved the federal government had power, but also the militia could be used to suppress rebellion, not just foreign threats. And then 1835 to 36, we're looking at the Texas Revolution. The militia, many from Tennessee and other states, joined Texas and the Texan settlers to fight Mexico for independence at the Battle of Alamo. And others were fought largely by volunteering militias. This was not officially U.S. military action, but American citizen acting as an armed people. And then 1861 to 65, the Civil War. Both the Union and Confederacy relied heavily on state militias to build their armies. The Confederate Army was built, or it was actually born out of a Southern militia. Some Northern militias acted independently to defend against Confederate raids. This was a war where the ideal of states, militias, and federal loyalty were deeply tested. And 1921, the largest armed uprising since the Civil War, was the Battle of Blair Mountain. In West Virginia, 10,000 coal miners, many armed, clashed with private guards, police, and the U.S. Army. They were fighting for better labor conditions and union rights. While not a formal militia, it echoed the spirit of armed citizens rising against oppression. And there's another historical account of something similar to this with the coal miners over in Coal Creek, Tennessee as well, because they tried to bring in prisoners to take their jobs over, and they would have, but the government lost because the people were armed, and they said, you're not taking our jobs. Very interesting history there in Coal Creek, Tennessee. And the militia in U.S. history, guys, this is just one final reflection here. It has not been one simple story. Sometimes it's been the hero story, like in the Revolution. And sometimes it's been the controversial story, like in the suppression of domestic unrest. But always rooted in the American belief that liberty must be defended, not just by law, but by the people themselves. And not just by the people themselves in voting, but a well-armed militia and regulated, like knowing how to use arms. And I believe this calls for another video on having that much power for the people and the citizens. Then the people and the citizens were expected to have a high morality of actually belief, even no matter what they believed in their religion, they had a moral belief that everybody had the right to live and everyone had the right to pursue happiness. And they had to have that because these people were designed, their constitution were designed for them to have power over their government. This had never been done before, and it was such an experiment. And here we are today, and a lot of us don't understand, or we're just relearning. So I hope you guys found this video entertaining. I hope you can check out some more videos on the channel. If you want me to cover a certain subject, please let me know. It's been nothing but a delight to spend some time with you. And I thank every one of you. Please subscribe if you've not already. Hit the bell, pass it along, and hopefully you found it educational. I found it educational to make it, and I'll talk to you guys later.